English translation 328th contact Saturday, 23rd July 2002, 06:33 hours.
You are kicking me out of bed early again, my friend. But be greeted and welcome anyway. And if you allow me, I would like to start our conversation by telling you what I asked Florina to tell you about the matters to do with Silvano, and the agreements and decisions made by the core group in connection with him. Because there are obviously misunderstandings and ambiguities in this very matter. This is precisely because, on the one hand, the discussions, reviews of the facts and decisions, etc., simply lack the necessary attention, as well as the perspective and the understanding and registration in the memory, and, on the other hand, because the accruing facts are not comprehensive and not precise enough, as well as not being logged with the necessary details.
Greetings to you as well, Edward, my friend. Actually, I wanted to talk about other things first. But I want to comply with your wish and first respond to your request. Silvano's duties and rights have been fundamentally regulated, especially since the 6th of October, done specifically by the following. As in many cases before, these matters were not recorded in sufficient detail and relevance, as I unfortunately had to find out once again, so that I have to fall back on our own records, because apparently various members of the group have also lost the registered attentiveness and the overview as a result of the rather heated discussion in this matter. In future, care should finally be taken to ensure that all important matters and decisions of the group are recorded in the minutes in such a manner that there can be no doubt whatsoever if, for whatever reason, something has to be looked up and read in the minutes afterwards. In addition, all members of the group should be so attentive at every meeting and when discussing the individual items on the agenda that everything discussed and presented as well as the decisions made are kept in clear and lasting memory. Unfortunately, this has not been the case so far, which is a grave evil that repeatedly leads to unpleasant disagreements regarding group decisions, etc. The inattentiveness at meetings and in the case of instructions and decisions also leads to misunderstandings, which could be avoided absolutely and in all things by a serious and clear listening and thinking. It should really and finally have penetrated all members of the group in duty and responsibility that only by this everything can win its order.
Thank you, that helps me a lot. But it also tells me that I have understood everything correctly, and that I have not taken Silvano to task without justification.
It is very unfortunate that you have to act in this wise, but unfortunately you have no other choice if the order in the center and the progress of the mission is to be maintained. And indeed, contrary to his own opinion, Silvano has to be given instructions, since he cannot work or organize independently and without these necessary necessities. If I have to assess him, I have to explain that he is still very immature in his thinking as well as in his feelings and in his actions. And moreover, he is insincere, and in all things, if it is possible for him, he takes the path of least resistance. However, we should deal with this subject further in a private conversation at a later date, because very unpleasant things arise from his behavior and actions, which also affect others. And indeed, as a result of Silvano having deluded them into believing something, and that they are thus influenced by something that is not given with him and does not correspond to the truth, with which, moreover, he has duped himself, and moreover has already maneuvered himself into a dilemma, which unfortunately has a very negative effect. But I will also talk about this later in private with you in detail. You need to be oriented about this also when you are asked for answers and explanations.
The negative change in Silvano that you mentioned has already been noted by various group members. It has not gone unnoticed by me either.
Unfortunately, Silvano's existence in the group is already endangered, which can clearly be attributed to his negative and self-referential wise of thinking and acting, which has deteriorated considerably since last November.
This is also the view of all those group members who have noticed his negative change.
So let us talk about it later. So listen to what I have to tell you. On behalf of our entire spiritual leadership, I have a great debt of gratitude to you. In total, I must thank you for your great and immensely important work which you have done for us in only 78 days. All the material is absolutely new to us and must be learned and put into practice in many years of study. In fact, we had no idea, let alone knowledge, of all these very high values and this immensely high-quality teaching. The whole thing goes far beyond anything we could have imagined. But that was probably a good thing, because at our Congress, which lasted 71 days, we came to the insight and understanding that all the values and the teaching which you handed down to us from Nocademians and Hanok's storage banks should not have been given earlier, because they would not have been understood comprehensively and could have caused great harm. Accordingly, it was very good that none of our spiritual leaders are able to generate the storage bank frequency of Nocademians, Hanoks and Enochs, and that they do not know the memory code and the word code as well as the decryption code. All this high knowledge and high-quality teaching still poses a very great danger if the material were to fall into the wrong hands. This could have been the case with us at an earlier point in time, which is why it was right for Nocademion, Hanok, and Enoch to predetermine the time when the spiritual leadership would come into the possession of the knowledge and the teaching. Of course, we also know that in the storage banks of Nocademion, Hanok, and Enoch there is much more knowledge and probably the whole further teaching stored, and that only you alone can call up this knowledge and the teaching that goes with it, so our spiritual leadership will never have access to it, just as other human life forms of any kind will not. In addition, many questions continue to arise from all the values and the teaching, so all the questions you have already answered are not enough. So we continue to need your help and explanations, which is why you should be the chief advisor of our spiritual leadership, as has been collectively and unanimously agreed upon. Provided, of course, that you wish to carry this honor and dignity. This will bring you a lot of extra work, but we would be extremely grateful if you would be willing to take on this task. All of us. That is to say, a good deal more than 29,000 spirit guides and ishwishes need your instructive help with regard to the teaching of the Spirit, which is much more extensive than we all have known up to now. And since you are the only one who knows the codes of Nocademion, Hanok and Enoch and has the necessary frequency to be able to draw the knowledge from the storage banks. But you are also the only one who can explain everything according to reality. You are our only help. We ask you to do this.
Are you really out of your mind? Wow, Ptah, dear friend, how can I do that? I am not an Ishwish or a spiritual leader. How could I be the spiritual leader's chief advisor? Just think of it. I, an earthly barbarian, an earthly rascal.
But he whose knowledge of the teaching of the Spirit is far greater than that of our spiritual guidance, and you too are the most knowledgeable person on the earth in this respect. You should not hide your light under a bushel.
You speak in old words, my friend, just like Enoch, from whom Emmanuel took over.
That is probably true. But what now, my friend? Do you want to take the honor and dignity upon yourself?
Ptah, if I had a comb like a rooster, it would shine bright red and shining. Man, I am going crazy or megalomaniac, because the whole thing is really too much of a good thing and too much of an honor and dignity.
The going crazy and the megalomania will certainly not be true. But as far as honor and dignity are concerned, this is fully justified. Our entire spiritual leadership and all our ishwishes decided.
It would be wrong to refuse your request. So, I will help you with the necessary explanations, etc. But please let the chief advisor be only an idea that is already forgotten.
then I express all our thanks to you. I also want to tell you that with your help, we have achieved an immeasurable amount for our and our people's evolution. As for the chief advisor, that is not our concern. So there is no need for us to say any more about that. But what interests me now is how you manage to live on the earth with all your knowledge of the teaching of the spirit among human beings who carry and understand only a small part of your spiritual teaching knowledge. And how is it that you are able to bring the higher values concerning the teaching of the spirit to the measure that it must be tailored to the earth humans? And how do you prevent that you never bring too much of the knowledge and that you do not make promises in this regard?
This is not a matter of difficulty, for I store very few things in my memory concerning those values and teachings that must remain secret, or that simply cannot yet be understood and comprehended by the Earth humans. All my knowledge, which is intended for the Earth humans outside the actual teaching, I do not store in my memory, but leave it in the storage banks, where I can retrieve any information at any time in a matter of seconds. In the same manner that I have done this with all the teaching material created for you and the knowledge and teaching of the Spirit. Afterwards, I simply forgot everything again, so to speak. You can see the matter in such a wise that I deduct the necessary knowledge from the storage banks in each case, let it into my consciousness, write down everything or talk about it, after which I immediately forget it again and only retrieve it when I need it. So I also cannot blurt out anything that is not meant for it, because the memory does not contain the necessary information, and therefore cannot release any. This is extremely safe and reliable. Also with regard to what would happen if I were to be exposed to hypnosis or any truth drugs, because information not present in the memory cannot be released by force, etc. That is the whole secret.
You have described this process in the 553 pages that you have written for us during the 78 days. But I will have some more questions about this after our official conversation.
Of course, nothing stands in the way of that. But here I have some more notes with questions, if you allow me.
My time is not limited.
Now then, did you ask Quetzal about how the catching up within a month, or the catching up in the time of a month of the different duties and to which duties this regulation, recommended by Quetzal and accepted and decided by the group, refers?
The regulation of bringing forward or catching up the duty within 1 month applies exclusively to the night watch. This regulation does not apply to other duties. The meditation duty is regulated elsewhere and does not fall under the possibility of making up for it, but only of making up for it. For the holiday period, Quetzal recommends that a group decision should also be made by a group resolution to regulate duties to be brought forward or made up for, with a proposal that provides for a maximum of 75 days each for bringing forward and making up the time.
This should certainly be acceptable and feasible, and will be clarified at the next General Assembly. And what did Quetzal say about the rules and obligations for group members after their retirement? Did I or did I not understand Quetzal's instruction and statement from that time correctly?
Certain duties from ancient times, when the new mission was decided for the modern age, are for life. However, this does not include the resolution provisions which were drawn up by the group members at their own discretion or on Quetzal's advice, as these can be changed, improved, canceled, or extended as required by a unified resolution of the General Assembly. This is the case, for example, with Sunday service, except for the rules laid down by Quetzal in this regard for the special Swiss public holidays and Sundays for reasons of fairness. With regard to the fulfillment of duties with regard to the resolution provisions, which are therefore not predetermined by age, but have been worked out in cooperation of the group members with Quetzal's proposals, there are therefore no lifelong deadlines set. Lifetime applies only to the direct mission tasks and mission duties. And as far as the fulfillment of duties according to the resolution provisions after retirement is concerned, it is, and was given from the very beginning, that of course the retirement age should be taken into account for a withdrawal from the resolution determination duties. However, each group member should be careful to ensure that only serious reasons are given for resigning from a duty, since other group members must take over and continue the duties that have been resigned. A resignation of a duty must be compatible with the carrying of one's own responsibility and with a good conscience, and is therefore a purely personal and private matter, with which each group member must cope alone and consult with himself or herself. No group member can be forced to perform his or her duties. However, each individual member should be careful to carry and fulfill his or her duties as far as their capabilities, possibilities, and health aspects, etc. allow.
So that is cleared up too. Thank you for your and Quetzal's explanation. What has been said helps us further. Then another question. What is the situation with your language mixtures? Are your various languages preserved, or do they fall into decay as they do here on the Earth? And is there such a thing as trying by all means to eradicate other languages in order to make a special language the world language, as has been practiced here for decades or even more than a century by the Americans, who first and foremost try to eradicate the German language, along with all others, and replace it with their American language?
Something like this does not happen here and would not be allowed. On Era 16 to 403 alone, we have different languages, which in turn have many dialects of their own, and for this it is determined by a corresponding law that all languages and dialects are preserved in their form. This means that the languages and dialects must not be mixed with others either, but must be preserved in their originality, which is a conscious duty for all those from Era to keep to it and not to let any violations arise. Many inhabitants of Era learn several foreign languages and dialects much more frequently than is the case with the humans on the Earth. For the general understanding of all humans of all ethnic groups among themselves, it is the duty of every single person on Era to learn the standard language, which we simply call Eranish Erin, as well as Pliayaran Sarat. This language is used from the earliest childhood. Therefore, it is equal to the mother tongue, and it can be said that every Erin citizen learns and cultivates two mother tongues perfectly from childhood on. In addition to this, we have the intercosmic Kosan, a language spoken throughout our Federation and spoken by little more than a third of our total population.
Then a question, which I could have answered, but which is important and should be answered officially by you. I have been approached on several occasions and have also given a corresponding answer, although I think that an explanation on your part would be better. Would you, or can you agree to this?
Certainly.
Good, thank you. So then, the Kalak tree, as it is called in the lore, under whose huge branches an entire native village was placed, was it a gigantic umbrella acacia, if I am not mistaken? I tried several times to find this tree in special book encyclopedias, but there were not even any clues about this giant tree.
You are not mistaken, because the Kalak tree is actually a giant tree, the umbrella acacia, as you say. Under these trees, the natives used to build their small villages to protect themselves from the sun and storms. This tree species, however, only grew in tropical areas, and in my opinion, it is probably extinct on the Earth at the present time. I have no exact knowledge in this regard, so I do not know if there are still some specimens somewhere in Africa. However, there are still species of this tree genus, although they are no longer as giant as the Kalak tree was a few thousand years ago.
The Ishwish Mata, or God's Eye, was created millions of years ago by a megalomaniacal Ishwish. It is a so-called ring nebula, which also appears naturally and cosmically. In our Milky Way alone, there are said to be more than 600 of them, although there are also different forms, as you explained to me on my great journey. The Ishvishmata, however, was created, as already mentioned, by an Ishvish who had become megalomaniacal. In addition, questions arise again and again. Why an Ishvish, who is supposed to be a king of wisdom, can cause destruction in this or any other negative form? To this end, I have explained, according to my knowledge, that not all Ishvishes are the same, since there are different forms or degrees of the term Ishvish in relation to different fields of knowledge. In this episode, I explained, there are, for example, the degrees of Ishvish in relation to the technical science, the computer science, the historical science, the medical science, etc., etc. The highest form of Ishvish is the degree of spiritual science, in which creation science and life science are anchored, as well as all the fields related to these. Spiritual science, and thus the Ishvish, is the degree of the highest spiritual knowledge and the spiritual teaching, and thus the most comprehensive knowledge and the greatest wisdom with regard to all creational laws and recommendations, as well as their observance, and to the conduct of life according to the laws of the creation, etc. And exactly in this form, that is to say, in this degree of Ishvish knowledge, love and wisdom are so highly developed that no more conscious mistakes and mistreatments against the creational laws and recommendations, as well as no more wrongdoings and other violations can be committed. Because true love as well as knowledge and wisdom have become too extensive and too powerful to be violated. The situation is quite different with the other forms of Ishvish, which do not refer to creational law concerns but to material areas, in which great knowledge and great wisdom can be attained, whereby, however, these Ishvishes of purely material areas of knowledge are not immune from consciously committing mistakes, which are directed against the societal or creational order by serious offenses, and by which even the most serious destruction and annihilation can be caused. This was also the case with the Ishvish who, in his megalomania, created the Ishvishmata, or the Eye of God, for he was an Ishvish of the science of physics and the science of technology, etc., as you explained to me at the time. And he possessed, only in these material fields of knowledge, a great knowledge and great wisdom, and was therefore an Ishvish or a king of wisdom. It should be said and explained that wisdom, which is very often misunderstood by Earth humans, actually means nothing else than great wisdom, maturity, experience, and ability, all of which originates from a purposeful education.
What more can I say to this? In fact, I could not have explained it better, so there is nothing more to explain.
You are not really in the mood to explain yourself, are you?
No further explanation is really necessary because you have explained the issues sufficiently and very clearly.
Very well, let it be so. Thanks anyway. Then the following. I had an inquiry from America, which caused a misunderstanding, but which only became clear when I phoned Christian Frenner. It was about a figure who is called Indrid Cold in the USA, and who allegedly comes from a planet called Lanulos, as Andrew Cosette explained to me when he called. He also said that in America there is a story going around that this figure is probably of extraterrestrial origin. It is said to be headless, to have glowing red eyes and wings, and to have flown through the air, and so on and so forth. In general, it has been reported that the figure Indrid Cold was or is called Mothman, which can mean both Mothman and Mothman. This figure is said to have been particularly popular in 1967-68 in the village or town of Point Pleasant in West Virginia, and many UFOs have appeared, not only in West Virginia, but even worldwide. There are said to be hundreds of witnesses to all of these incidents, including many police officers. Since I had no knowledge of all this, and had obviously misinterpreted the name Mothman as Maitreya, I asked Michael Heseman for advice. Of course he did not find the Indrid Cold story, that is to say the Mothman story. Now the question about what to really think of this story if you know anything about it at all. And if yes, if you are allowed to talk about it. For my part, I think it would be very interesting and important to learn something about it and to hear some facts of the Enlightenment.
It is not worth thinking about it, because on the one hand, it is an invented, mischievous story about the Mothman, just an owl's mirroring, as you once called this kind of activity. On the other hand, at that time, a real hysteria arose regarding UFOs, according to which many humans at that time saw many unreal things that really did not exist. So through hysteria, they fell into hallucinations, self-generated real visions and strong imaginings. This hysteria was not limited to the United States of America, but spread all over the world. In fact, however, at that time some flying objects appeared which were unidentifiable for the Earth humans, whereby of all of them only 2 were really of extraterrestrial origin, which belonged to our Federation and which could be observed several times. All other observations were undoubtedly due to terrestrial flying objects of partly secret form, or to any natural terrestrial phenomena, or they were based on illusions and self-deceptions, etc., whereby the self-deceptions were usually based on wishful thinking, which was aimed at seeing extraterrestrial flying objects, as it is still the case today in the vast majority of cases of UFO observations.
Then that is settled too. Now, I would like to ask you what number of contacts have actually taken place between you and me in the last 3 months that were related to the work I have been doing for the spiritual leadership. What was the number of telepathic and personal contacts, and what is the total number of contacts to date since the last count? Florina did indeed receive this question and passed it on to you. Have you brought the data now?
During your working time for us, 8 telepathic contacts and 49 personal contacts took place between you and us, but they were not transmitted and not recorded in writing by you. Because the knowledge and all the explanations dealt with in the conversations were not meant for the human beings of the earth, but only for our spiritual leadership. And since the last count, there were 13 further personal contacts, as well as 5 telepathic contacts, whereby for the latter also no written records were made. So up to and including today, the 20th of July, 2002, there have been 575 personal and 710 telepathic contacts, of which 328 personal contact conversations have been and are being recorded by you in writing.
Christian Freiner can update the list again. This should actually be done every full year. What do you think?
This is a suggestion that should be followed.
All right, I will pass it on like that. But now I would like to talk to you about what we talked about the other day regarding the so-called crop circles. You said that in the next few weeks you could give me permission to talk about what you explained to me. Is that now, or is now the time?
The time has come to be able to talk openly about everything, because we have been able to finish our research and clarifications. In addition, since our conversation on this matter, knowledge has come to light among the Earth humans that allows me to speak openly about it now. You will soon find that confirmed. Although the basic facts are not yet known, what has been researched is sufficient to clarify things on our part. In this episode, I can also give you some information that you are not yet familiar with. So listen. As I have already explained in previous conversations, the so-called energy crop circles and energy pictograms are actually connected with extraterrestrial influences, but we first had to find out why you should not have talked about them. Because false explanations should not be allowed to arise so that no harm could arise through which the wrong paths could have been taken. But these outside influences are not according to how the crop circle believers assume, who believe that extraterrestrials are directly the originators of these creations. In fact, It is indeed Earth humans who, in an artistic wise and in effortful work, kick and roll the crop circles and pictograms with suitable aids of quite primitive form into the grain, etc., starting from prefabricated drafts and drawings, which in the beginning were handmade, but for some time now have been very artistically produced on computers and manually transferred to the crop fields, etc. So the whole thing is actually, as in old times, and as you have found out quite early on with Quetzal, purely human-made, although it must not be overlooked, as I have explained to you several times already, that extraterrestrial powers are involved. This is not, however, a form of extraterrestrials or extraterrestrial life forms of human or any other material kind, but solely and exclusively cosmic energies, which are taken up by the humans sensitive to them and which creatively support their fantasies and ideas. If one starts from these swinging wave powers and specifies them, then one can speak of universal evolutionary energies or evolutionary energies, as we do. These are the finest energy-swinging waves which are present universally and are absorbed by every human life form, thus stimulating their fantasies and ideas to develop. Depending on the person and their disposition, these swinging wave impulses give rise to the most diverse forms of application and use. In the case of making crop circles, the factor of drawing and designing as well as creative arts will appear, where these good values will simply be used by the swinging wave. That is to say, impulse receivers in the wise as to how it just comes out in the crop circles. This kind of art production is an individual form of each artist, and most of them want to remain anonymous and are content to indulge in their art and enjoy it as well as the confusion and the erroneous faith of certain humans who, as a result of their non-realistic thinking, indulge in things that are alien to any reality. It is still to be explained that during the first time when we noticed that extraterrestrial influences were playing a part in the energy pictograms or energy crop circles, that these could be suggestive and impulsive influences of any mischievous extraterrestrial human life forms, which is why we only started research in this direction, which took a long time. Finally, we were able to exclude this possibility, so we turned to further research several months ago and finally found the solution to the mystery, which we only managed to do last week.
You have already told me that in part, except that you have now found the solution to the mystery, which was only last week, as you say. But you have not explained everything yet, if I understood you correctly.
What I have not explained yet is the crop circle video, where white-colored objects appear, fly over a crop field, and in the next moment wide pictograms appear in the grain. This video, like others of the same or similar kind, are also fakes made on computers. The same is true for the Mexico video, on which a large disc-shaped object can be seen, which, coming from the left, flies to the right with a slow oscillating movement and disappears behind a high-rise building. The witnesses who have appeared and are still appearing, who claim to have seen the object, are influenced by the press and television. So their claims have no value whatsoever, and all the testimonies given are based only on suggestive influences and imaginations, as is the case with the testimonies of Carlos Diaz in Tepoztlan in Mexico.
This is really new to me, but I suspected it, because everything seemed very suspicious to me with all these videos that I also know. What do you actually think of Bush and Sharon in relation to what they are having their military do in the name of peace with regard to the so-called fight against terrorism, freedom and security for the country and the population? But I would not forget to include the Palestinians with their suicide squads, etc., in this question.
There can be no question of working for peace and for freedom and security for the country and human beings in any wise. nor are the murderous acts carried out on the orders of the military forces of Bush, Sharon, and the Palestinian leadership a counter-terrorism operation in the slightest, but on the contrary, effective terror for the purpose of gaining land and resources and personal, political, and financial power. This also applies to Yasser Arafat and to all other rulers of the world who act in the same wise. G.W. Bush Jr. as well as Sharon, Arafat and their like-minded ones in their ranks are just as incapable of leading a people and its military and the forces of order and the entire domestic and foreign policy, just as the Pope is not, and many other people's leaders before them were not, just as many others of the present are not, and many others of the future will not be. Leaders who crave only after power, wealth, revenge and retaliation, fame and self-glory and self-perpetuation can never be true leaders. For true leadership requires modesty, anti-materialism, knowledge, love, and wisdom, genuine leadership and honesty, personal inner and outer freedom, and peace with oneself and with one's fellow humans. And leadership also requires respect for all life, for law and justice, and adherence to the laws of the creation. But there must also be the necessary tolerance, as well as the virtues and the energy and strength never to lapse into lust for power, even if, under certain circumstances, in a situation, etc., it is necessary to be tough and use logical gavolt figu dict, to use, with all the coercive means that are at one's disposal, physical, psychical, mental, and consciousness-based powers, abilities, and skills in order to carry out and carry through tremendous actions and deeds. Illogical gavolt must never be debatable in any form in a leadership. If, however, illogical, evil violence, and thus evil violence with murder, death, torture, destruction, annihilation, and ruin, occurs nevertheless through leaders themselves or through their orders and their henchmen of a special, military or private nature, then we call such leaders war criminals and criminals against the right to life and against human beings, which applies to all direct and indirect rulers as well as to the executive bodies.
This is stated clearly and in a language that I think all humans understand, except those who refuse to accept the truth. But now another question concerning the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center in New York on the 11th of September 2001. The speech is about the fact that the American government and especially President Bush had been warned about this event, but that he had consciously and radically put a stop to everything in order to be able to realize his plans for world domination. His greed for the acquisition of resources and land, and the American position as world police, etc., in the form of the war on terror in a worldwide form. And when you consider what he has already done in Afghanistan, like his father, who was not a bit better, you can imagine that the rumor is true.
In this respect, I am not allowed to give an open answer, since you are writing down the reports of the conversations when you later retrieve them from our recording devices.
Aha, this answer also says a lot. But another question. Now and then the Earth humans from our future come into our dimension and thus into our space-time continuum, as you explained to me on my great journey. Also the Skrills and bioorganic flying objects, two special species, penetrate into our dimension from a dimension affiliated to us. Does this also apply to other humans of other dimensions who do not belong to you or to the Earth from the future?
That is the case, yes. But such occurrences are very rarely observed by us.
And what about foreigners from outside our Dern universe coming into our universe area from a foreign universe, apart from Asket's race from the Dal universe?
Something like that is not known to us. Even our very extensive monitoring and constant checks have never revealed anything that would indicate such events.
There is no possibility?
At least it is extremely small. Because outside of our Dern-Dal twin universe, we are mostly surrounded by universes that are only of a fine material nature and therefore much more highly developed than our two universes. This is also the reason why we cannot break into these universes.
So you have already explored this. Interesting, but how are you supposed to get into another material universe, as you want to do? It is a mystery to me. Somehow you should be able to create a highly concentrated energy channel through the fine material universes. Something like a wormhole that goes through all the higher evolutionary universes to a lower material creation universe, as stated in Nakademian's teachings. But you cannot reach its storage banks.
Amazing what you know about this. Apparently you have more knowledge in these matters than you ever mentioned to us. Your explanation corresponds to the actual facts, but I must confess to you that our own scientists did not gain the knowledge and find the solution to be able to enter foreign universes. The truth is that we have obtained the knowledge and plans and formulas, etc. elsewhere.
This can only be the very advanced humans of Asket's friends. But when will the enterprise that is to take you to a foreign universe take place now? And when can my jump to Simyase through the transmitter gate take place?
There is nothing to hide from you. However, with regard to your question, I can assure you that at least my journey to the foreign universe we have already determined, which is a universe of creation like ours, will take place this year. If all goes well, the next step will be your visit to my daughter Simya, say, but this may take some time and maybe even until next year.
Unfortunately, it is not always good for me here on Earth among the humans. If certain things cannot be kept from me, because it often causes me pain, especially when people lie to me and believe that I do not notice the lies, when I just pretend to take everything at face value. But regarding your journey to the foreign universe, I wish you the best, good success, and that everything really goes well, and that you come back again.
I know your way of acting in this respect, especially regarding the fact that you are often lied to and believed not to recognize the lie. For my journey, dear friend, about which you are obviously very concerned for me, all necessary safety arrangements, safety precautions, notes Billy, have been taken, and all possibilities of contingencies have been considered so that it is to be expected that no breakdowns will occur. So you need fear neither for me nor for all my companions and the company itself. We have already transported a transmitter station into the foreign universe through the energy channel you mentioned. In order to create attempts to get test objects transported back through this station, which we transport to it through the energy channel. All the experiments in 800,000 ways have been flawless and without the slightest malfunction.
Is this technology identical to the gate, through which one can bridge immeasurable distances in our universe simply by passing through it?
No, it is not the same technical achievement, because the technology by which an energy channel can be used by a foreign universe of higher energetic form is a much higher evolution of the technology than the one you address with the transmitter gate.
Of course, it is understandable. For my part, I have not dealt with Nakademian's technology, nor have I retrieved the relevant data. For reasons of principle, I have been content with simply informing myself about what is necessary to be able to enter a foreign universe of the creation and how it can be managed to penetrate or bridge higher energy universes or forms of creation, etc. Of course, I was interested in this information when you told me some time ago that you would soon be making a journey to a foreign universe, as your technology was already so highly developed that it now allowed such a journey.
This is the wise in which I imagined your approach. But now, dear friend, I once again have a request concerning a game of chess, if you are not too tired.
Fine, of course. I can also sleep an hour or two later. So let us see.
So now it is time for me to go again. For the time being, Florina and Injana will do the correction work with you and Bernadette.
Good you bring that up, Ptah, because the next 2 weeks are off because Bernadette is going on vacation and will be in northern Germany. So, we can only continue with our correction work on the 8th of August.
That does not pose a problem. But now, my friend, it is really time for me. Goodbye and Salome.
See you soon, and until then farewell and Salome as well.